So today, I'm going on a sartorial journey with lifestyle influencer, columnist and author Paula Sutton. After starting off as a press officer with Elite Premier Model Agency in London, she worked in fashion PR and as a model agent before landing at Elle, where she was the bookings director. Paula moved from London to rural Norfolk 13 years ago. Her photogenic posts about English country living have earned her a large and loyal following. On Instagram, where she posts as @HillHouseVintage, she chronicles the pleasures of dressing, entertaining, decorating and gardening from her home. So Paula, let's talk clothes.
Absolutely.
What is your earliest sartorial memory? When did you first realise the impact of clothes?
Do you know, it's funny, I'm going to go back a long, long way.
Good.
My father, he was an immigrant from Grenada in the Caribbean, and they came over, my mother and my father came over in the early 60s and had a very broad range of experiences and life experiences. And my father started off as a hospital porter and ended up as an ambassador, and he sort of the whole range of life. And I always remember when I was very young, he was obsessed with putting ribbons in my hair, which is probably why I do that now. And he just loved dressing me formally and properly. So I used to have these little smock dresses, and I used to have proper formal dresses and shiny shoes and little frilly ankle socks, when all of the other children were in jeans and jumpers, and we'd all be dressed very smartly as if we were going for Sunday church, but normally for every day apart from school uniform. And so from a young age, and my father was quite a dandy, so he'd always have his little kerchief in his suit, and he'd always be overdressed. He always felt it was better to be overdressed than underdressed. And that's something that stayed with me all my life. So literally as young as I can remember, maybe 4 or 5 years old, I remember these matching ribbons to the dresses.
How completely charming. Because I also had that sort of relationship with my father, and it brings such happy and warm memories, doesn't it?
I loved it. I felt so special. And he used to do my hair in these little puffball plaits, and then the little ribbons on each. And it's such a warm memory for me, because he was very busy, and his life became increasingly more and more busy, and he was taken away to work abroad, and he was doing all the sort of diplomatic stuff. And I just always remember how lovely he was to take the time to do my hair and to help me with my little dresses, and that was his sort of fun downtime, I suppose, as well.
Completely precious. I mean, vintage, I always think, is a massive part of your life, both sartorially and interior design-wise. Has it always been important to you? When was the moment that you started discovering vintage?
It's interesting. As a teenager, I was very much into vintage. So having had my father dress me in ribbons and dresses, I suddenly found, I discovered Dr. Martens, and I discovered Kensington
Hypermarket.
That's it, the hypermarket. And we used to go there, and Carnaby Street back in the day wasn't sort of like the tourist sort of like fabulous place it is now. It was very much full of vintage places that did army surplus and mod wear and vintage mod wear and things like that. So I used to, as a teenager, sort of go to Carnaby Street and go to Kensington High Street and sort of go to all the army surplus and try and sort of make my own way of dressing it up, because I always like to dress up, but I wanted to find a unique take on that.
And were you more army surplus girl back then? When did you evolve into this beautiful English rose?
Well, my army surplus was based on Audrey Hepburn. So I loved Audrey Hepburn, and I loved all of these sort of 1950s old Hollywood films. And so it was always my chic take on army surplus. So if I had a little jacket, I'd imagine a film. I'd imagine a film that I'd seen someone like Audrey Hepburn in, and I'd try and, maybe it would be little black cigarette pants and little ballet slippers, and then my little army surplus jacket or something. So I used to mix it up, and it was always very filmic, and it was a sort of fantasy take on sort of vintage for me.
That's fascinating, because I often, when I look at your Instagram, I often feel you create almost these movie sets.
Oh, I'm obsessed with film.
And I think about it, and I imagine you as a bookings editor back at Elle. You must have been thinking
My mind used to race with what I would do, because as a bookings editor, you're really fulfilling other people's creative dreams and then their endeavors. So you're putting the nuts and bolts together for somebody else's vision. And when you're a creative person, although I don't think I realized how creative I was at that point, but when you're a creative person, you sit there and you're thinking, well, I would do this and I would do that. And if it was my shoot, I would do this. But I was there to book the photographer and book the hair and makeup and book all the pieces that put somebody else's work together. But yes, I always thought, well, this is how I would improve it. But of course, it wasn't my place to say, and it wasn't what I did. It wasn't my role. And I do believe that that's what's sort of come tumbling out with Hill House Vintage. They're the shoots that I would have done if I had been the bookings editor and the fashion editor and the photographer and the stylist.
Were you ever tempted to try to get into styling, or was it just such a difficult?
Not really.
world?
I've always been very committed to the job I'm doing at the time. So in a way, I sort of stayed in the box, and that was my job, that was my role, and I wanted to do that to the best of my ability. So I was a brilliant bookings editor. You know, I was good at I'm a good shoot producer. And I didn't think really in terms of, well, maybe I should try and be the stylist, or, you know, you go along such a long route getting through your career that the idea of starting from scratch.
And particularly back then.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Everyone was in their own
channel,
role. And you said, I think careers and work is so much more fluid now. I think people are more open to trying all the different avenues and different things.
Well, I think they're saying now that people will have 4 or 5 careers over their lifetime, when, you know, perhaps our era, she says, very...
No, absolutely. I definitely
it was very much one career.
Yes, absolutely. It was sort of not so much a job for life, but more that to prove that you were a good worker, you stuck at what you were doing, you know.
And you evolved up that career ladder of
exactly.
that.
No matter how long it took, you sort of like, you put those bricks one on top of the other, you didn't look elsewhere.
And so you had this wonderful London style, and then you arrive in rural Norfolk. That is quite a tongue twister. But you do. You arrive in this beautiful Georgian pad in rural Norfolk. And how did that influence your sartorial style?
Gosh, completely. Because in London, I was very much, once again, influenced by the vintage. So I used to wear pencil skirts and high heels and sort of little cashmere cardigans.
Oh, I can see.
And in my mind, I was sort of like a black Grace Kelly, you know. And I used to really love that sort of 1950s look. And then I got to, and I'd be running about in heels, you know, hailing cabs and jumping on buses and going down into the tube.
Getting a lot of wolf whistles, I would imagine.
No, I don't know about that. But you know, doing everything in, you know, 3, 4, 5-inch heels. And that was just normal. Exactly. And it was the most normal thing. And my ankles could cope in those days. And then I moved to the countryside. And of course, I had this wardrobe full of high heels that you've got mud, you've got gravel, you've got fields, and, you know, we had a dog. I didn't have a need for these wonderful shoes. I still have everything I've ever had from my old-fashioned days. I've still got it. It's like a museum.
Wow.
And I've got daughters. who...
And do you allow them to raid it?
They do, but I've told them until they're more responsible. they're 18. I've got 18-year-old twin girls, and their rooms are very untidy. Until they can tidy their rooms, they can't have my clothes.
No Manolos.
No Manolos. But so I was thrust into this, of my own making, into this new world where it was all about walking the dog, and it was all about being quiet and not being showy and not being seen. And I retreated. And in all honesty, I left London because I was just tired. I was tired. It was a bit of a moment where I just felt I'd crashed and burned. I had 3 children under 3 at one point.
Oh.
And I gave all to my career, but then I would come home and think, but I'm not giving enough to you, so I'll try and give all to you. And then I think I'm not giving up to the career. And I was totally torn between wanting to be a certain type of mother who gave my all to my children, but also wanting to be the best person at work. And the two can't always coexist alongside each other. So I completely had a crash and burn moment. And that was the reason we moved to Norfolk. Because I'm out of sight, out of mind. I couldn't stay in London and see all the amazing, wonderful things I was missing and know that I'd feel settled. So we had to move away. And that's why we went to Norfolk. And so my life totally changed. But with that change came a complete retreat. And I started wearing my husband's old jumpers and old wax jackets and Wellington boots and I had a few quiet and uncertain years where I sort of didn't know what I was supposed to be. I'd come from being a very much high fashion into my going to the shows and all that sort of thing.
Sexy power girl.
To being somebody who didn't really know what my purpose was beyond being a mother. And I was doing that and I was happy and I didn't ever regret the move, but I didn't know what my role and how to dress really at that point.
And so what was the turning point, or was it an evolution rather than a revolution?
Do you know, I think if I look back, it was probably an evolution, but it felt very quick. The change felt very quick. So after a good 3 or 4 years of dressing down and not really expressing myself with my clothes, I started to realize that I was pretty miserable. And I couldn't put my finger on what was making me miserable. I knew I didn't want to go back to London. I didn't want to return to the city or my old life. But I did know that something wasn't quite right yet. And it started, this sounds so silly, but it started with my red lipstick. In London, I'd always worn red lipstick. And I started wanting to hide and retreat in Norfolk because I didn't want to stand out. As a black woman, I stood out in the area that I was already. The idea of being totally glammed up seemed even more sort of like headlights going, look at me. And I didn't want that at that stage in my life. And so I used to walk my dog Coco. And I remember one day thinking, let me just put some lipstick on. No one sees me. I'm walking the dog through fields and no one sees me for about an hour. So I'll put my red lipstick on. And I suddenly felt a little bit jaunty. And, this is how I used to feel when I put my makeup on in the past. And then I thought, well, let me do a little flick of eyeliner. No one's watching. No one can see me. So, it can't hurt. No one's going to think I look silly. And I think that's part of the thing. I had this fear that I would be accused of not being a country girl. Putting makeup on, that I wanted to be serious. I wanted to be taken seriously. And that's not what country women do. They don't wear red lipstick in the morning and they don't put their eyeliner on and their mascara. So I started putting those things back on and becoming a hybrid of what I used to be. So it wasn't full glam. I didn't start walking through the fields in high heels, but I would have my boots, but with a bit of makeup. And then I thought, okay, the makeup, that was nice.
Did you start feeling a bit more like you again?
I did. I started feeling a bit more like me. And it was sort of, one thing led to the other. I thought, well, let me put on a bit of a nicer jacket. Let me make more of an effort with what I'm wearing. And it just grew and grew and grew. And with the growth of how I was dressing, I just got happier. I just felt more like me.
And is that when you started your posting on Instagram? When you sort of found you again?
It's when I started posting me, but my Instagram account had been there already, but it was all about interiors and all about my dog and country life. And I used to post videos of, you could see I'd sometimes show my feet. And then I'd sort of like pan up and you'd see the dog walking through the countryside. So it was all about how I lived as opposed to me. I came along a bit later. I started off saying hello on my birthday once a year. And then I'd retreat back and scuttle back and hide myself again.
Because you were, didn't really have the confidence in...
My confidence just went. My confidence just sort of dropped completely. And I hadn't been overly confident in London, but I was just a London girl who worked, and that's what we did. You dress up and you're assertive and you're sort of like you're hailing that cab and you're making sure you get it. So it's not that I was overly confident. I was just doing what I've always done. But my confidence definitely dropped when I got to Norfolk.
In London, do you think you were using your clothes as your armour?
I think it was about clothes, but it was also about just knowing the world you're in. And so because you know the world you're in, you fit.
That's a really good point.
You fit into that world. And when I went to Norfolk, I didn't know the world. I wasn't sure what my role in that world was. I knew I loved it there. I knew that it brought me peace. I knew that I had turned into the mother who made cakes for my children every afternoon when they came home from school. And I knew that I was sort of the dog walking mother, but I didn't know. I've always worked. I'd always earned my own money. I had a paper round at the age of 13 or 12 or something. And then I worked in Chelsea Girl as a Saturday girl at one point.
Love
And
that.
so I had always earned money. And so suddenly going to the countryside and deciding that life was going to change, first of all, it meant giving up my career. And I think that threw me. It totally threw me. And that's where my confidence left, because I didn't know, when somebody asked me, hello, what's your name? What do you do? For a few years, I said, I used to work at Elle. I used to work. And it used to be this thing that I'd started talking about, something that was happening and getting further and further away from who I was now. And when it got so far that you can't keep saying what you used to do 4 or 5 years ago, I think that's when I hit a point when I thought, well, who am I then? What am I?
It's interesting. I think most women go on a sartorial journey, and at some point in their life, whether it's a career change or a stopping working or starting working after children, whatever
Absolutely.
it is, it's okay, who am I?
Who am I now? Absolutely.
And it's discovering who we are sartorially.
Totally.
Who would you say you are now? How would you describe your style, your sort of style DNA, I call it?
Gosh, I think now it's all about happiness for me. It's all about, it started off as something that brought me joy. And then by showing myself on the internet, it seemed to bring other people joy. And so now it's all about doing what makes you happy. And I love putting the full face of makeup on, whatever I'm doing. I love putting a frock on, whether I'm doing the gardening or whether I'm walking the dog. But I also love, dressing up in tweeds and a waistcoat.
I've seen that.
I become characters. So who am I? I'm a joyful dresser. That's how I describe myself. I just a joyful dresser, because I have fun.
But so are you dressing for yourself?
Absolutely. Oh gosh, yes.
And your audience at all? And now you're such an influencer. Do you find, are you pushing yourself sartorially because of your 500,000 plus followers?
Do you know, I don't think I'm pushing myself because of the followers. I think I'm pushing myself because as I've gotten older, I just don't care. I don't mind growing more and more eccentric. I love it.
It's fantastically liberating, isn't it?
It's fantastic. It's wonderful. I don't mind if, I think when you're younger, you think, well, somebody might look and think, well, why is she wearing that? That's odd. Now I know that people get it. They sort of like know that you're having fun. If you walk out with confidence and a smile, then it doesn't matter what you can have a jester's hat on. If you're owning that jester's hat, then people are going to go, brilliant, well done with the jester's hat. And you'll have 5 other people wanting to know where you bought it from.
Exactly. Talking about influencer, I read a brilliant interview that you did with Vogue, and there was a sudden moment of growth on your social media. A debate had sparked around your style and gorgeous home as a black woman. But can you just tell me a little bit about that?
It was a very weird moment. It was I had just come back from my mother's funeral. So that was a major happening in my life. And I'd been nursing her in my home. She'd come over for a party for my father's 80th birthday, and then they'd found out she had leukemia. And then she stayed at my house for a few months, and then we managed to get her back home in order to die. They were living in Grenada at that point. And I'd come back from there straight into lockdown. I think I had a week between my mother's funeral or being there for my mother's funeral and lockdown. And so I got home, and at that point I'd reached around 100,000 followers or something like that. And I was thinking, how wonderful, exactly, how amazing, fantastic. And my father, before I left, said, I love looking at your photos. It keeps me, it really gives me a smile seeing you. You please show more of yourself,
Proud
so I can see you from Grenada. And so I got back, and I was feeling sad about my mother. I was feeling distraught because I'd left my father, and suddenly, they met as children. So suddenly he was on his own. And then we had lockdown, and I started putting all my energy into creating these images. So it suddenly became all about me. But in my mind, it was sort of these images from the 1950s fashion shoots, or the sort of black and white photography that I love and that I'd always wanted to see in magazines. But I put myself in it. So I was a photographer. I'd be taking my sort of timer on my camera and taking photos. And then because my children are home, I started roping them in. And I would dress up, and because the house has symmetry and the garden has symmetry, I'd sit myself in the middle of the garden. And in my mind, I was just creating lovely visual images. It wasn't about, look at me, how fabulous am I? It was about joyful images. And it was a creative outlet that I needed because we were in lockdown and because I was pretty miserable and in mourning.
Yes.
And so I put a lot of energy into the images, and you'll sort of see me suddenly start to appear right at the beginning of lockdown a lot more than I used to.
Absolutely.
And I remember one afternoon, I just posted a picture of me sitting down in my garden. I was having a picnic, and I was sitting with a hat on, and you couldn't really see my face. In fact, you couldn't really see me properly. But it was, I loved it because it was very symmetrical and it was very colourful and quite joyful. And one afternoon I saw my account rise by, I don't know, I think suddenly 1,000 people, extra people. I thought, oh my goodness, that's amazing. And usually when that happens, somebody shared you. So I thought, that's lovely. Someone famous has shared me. And then the next minute it was 5,000 followers and 10,000 new followers. And then it got to 50,000. And then your heart starts palpitating.
This is all highly enviable until...
Do you know, when it starts going too fast, it feels out of control.
Yes.
And I had grown my numbers over, 6 or 7 years. And you feel like you know your audience, and you know that they're there for the interiors and they're there for a little glimpse of me sometimes, but they all love the dog.
Yes.
And suddenly I was getting 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000. And over the course of a weekend, it grew by 300,000 extra people. Good. And I was panicked in the beginning. I just thought, I don't know why there's this sudden interest in me. I don't know what people are looking at and what they're seeing. And I thought Oprah Winfrey had shared me or something. I thought it has to be somebody so influential and so big that it has to be someone like that. And then I found out that what had happened, there was a Twitter storm going on, and a young journalist had shared my photo and said, this is the day I've left Instagram, and this is the image that why are influencers always sort of showing off? And here's me stuck in my garden, and there she is in her big garden showing off. And it had turned into a race situation. I personally, I don't think it had intended to be that. I don't think she was targeting me because I was black, but because she was frustrated and she was stuck in her flat without a garden. And I totally understand that. It must be very frustrating when suddenly especially as a young person, your whole life is curtailed.
Yes.
It stops. And then you see people still having a lovely time and having a wonderful time. But in my mind, I was just creating pretty images. And the Twitter storm was what's known as Black Twitter had come to my rescue. And they were saying, why are you attacking? And why are you coming after a woman in her 50s and a black woman? We don't normally see black women in this sort of environment or situation. Of all the people to attack, don't go for this one. And that's what started it. So the whole thing grew and grew and snowballed, and I gained a massive following. It was uncomfortable in the beginning. I was very grateful for people being interested in me, but it was having so many more eyes on me.
I was going to say, did that
was
put a
disconcerting.
lot more pressure on the image making?
It did. It did put pressure on the image making, but also on how much I was willing to share about myself, because until then people hadn't seen my children. They'd seen me and the dog and the house.
Yeah.
And my garden. And suddenly people, the most Googled thing was, who is Paula Sutton's husband? Who are the children? Where did the children go to school? What did it, questions that no one had.
Quite personal.
Very personal questions I didn't even entertain the idea that people would be interested in that sort of thing. So when you've suddenly got a lot of people wanting to know more about you, it threw me for a while. And then I decided, no, this is, embrace it. I'm 52. I think I was 50 at the time. I'm 50. This is a second wind in my life that I didn't know. I didn't expect it would happen. And let's take the positives. Let's enjoy it. Let's take it for what it is. And then I carried on going, and I love it. It's wonderful. People are so lovely and generous. And, my following is full of amazing, amazing people who who want to share in the joy.
Actually, it's lovely. I mean, I've had a life-changing moment, as you know, over the last year. And when people really, and thank you for being here, really get behind your second wind, your new career, and it's joyful.
It's so joyful.
And it's just this wonderful new opportunity.
It really is. And also it's, 50 isn't old. 50 is very young. 50 is really young. However, you're led, and I don't know if it's our generation more and the generations before us, you were led to believe that 50 was the wind down time. And 50 is when I'm just beginning now.
I look at the Rolling Stones in the 80s.
Exactly.
We've got a long way to go.
We've got a long, long way to go, and I think it's important that people see us and see that.
Definitely, and realise that actually we don't need to be dressing like our grannies did because of our age. Far from it. I think it's really important to shake it up. And you're wearing a beautiful floral dress, but with boots today.
Oh, yeah,
and
absolutely.
It looks great. And I think it's that little edge.
This is the thing. I almost wore sort of black men's brogues today as well, because it's not about. I dress in my dresses and I love my dresses, but it's not about being feminine in this sort of like very pretty version of English country life. It's still about being me and my version of it, which is very different to just going full on country. And there's nothing wrong with going full on country. I mean, my philosophy is you do you. If you want to go the whole feminine route, that's wonderful. And if you want to butch it up a bit and go a bit masculine and throw things in, that's brilliant, because it's all about being very individual and it's all about your own personality coming out. And my personality but I'm from South London, that's where I'm originally from. So there's still a little element of that sort of trendy Paula who used to go clubbing when her parents didn't realise at the age of 16, There's still a little bit of that in me, that little minx in
sorry,
me.
Dad.
Yeah, sorry, Dad, now you know. But, mixed up with the whole bucolic, lovely country life and, growing vegetables and growing flowers.
Oh, love that. You talk about holding on to your clothes. Do you have one item of clothing that means the most to you?
Goodness, it's probably my shoes, actually, because with shoes you can still fit into them 30 years later, 20 years later. So I have a pair of very, very pretty Chanel shoes that are, once again, far too high for me to wear now. And they're satin, and they're peach and pink satin. And they're incredibly beautiful. They're almost like they're like the cakes I make. They're frilly and pretty and like Marie Antoinette, which is incidentally my middle name. So it's very in keeping with me. But and I just love looking at these things.
Gosh, I can see them in a glass dome, actually, sort of one on top of the other.
Absolutely, and me taking them out to the table to be eaten. Yeah. With fondant fancies around them. That is a very good post. I'll do that.
Just tag me. You talk about sort of these film set looks. Do you, if you're traveling to Italy or to the Caribbean, are you incredibly mindful of the picture of you in that setting?
I am, and it's something that's automatic now. I don't even, it's not a pre-planned thing. I'll suddenly see a place or a view and I'll think, oh gosh, that would look great here. I'm also now increasingly thinking, because I love music and I love musicals and I love films, musical films in that way, I now increasingly think of scenes that I love from films, and I think, oh, I could recreate that, and sort of, because now with reels you can put the music to everything. I imagine myself, I've got this image, I've got a Cabbages and Roses suit that I've just recently had, and it looks like Maria von Trapp when she goes up to the von Trapp house in The Sound of Music, and in my mind I'm thinking, right, I'm going to wear that and I'm going to find some gates like that and just do a reel to go to be Maria von Trapp. And so I think in terms of the view and the scene, but also just the whole film clip.
It sounds like you don't travel light.
And I've never been a sort of light packer, to be honest. No, I've got to. I think in outfits, so yeah, I need a lot of space.
Are you very conscious of your airport look?
Not really, but then I don't don't dress down anyway, so I'm not the sort of person who would ever go in joggers or in trainers. So
I can't imagine you.
No,
wearing...
it's not. It's my children do, but it's never been me apart from my clubbing years. And so when I go to the airport, I dress how I would normally dress anyway.
How lovely. So which brand would you consider to be your guilty secret?
Gosh, my guilty. Well, the ones that bring me the most pleasure, as I just mentioned, Cabbages and Roses, is a one. It's so quirky, it's so English, and it's just so very small and very unique. So that, I think, epitomizes my style in many ways. But then, I also love, it's sort of, I'm trying to think now.
Money No Object brand?
Money No Object, let me think. It would probably be, goodness me. Right, I'm going out of England now, so it'd probably be sort of Prada, but Prada from the late 1990s. It was what we would call granny chic back in those days.
Yes.
And that's so me at the time. I've sort of grown into my granny chic because I'm sort of getting towards that age now. But when I was in my 20s and 30s, I'd have the sort of little Prada kilts and sort of long socks and big chunky shoes, and it would be quite prim and proper. But because you were sort of like wearing it in a jaunty way, it would be quite sexy with it as well. So I to be honest, it's so hard to think of one brand because I just love clothes so much.
Your wardrobe must be enormous.
It's bigger than it ought to be.
Is your husband as interested in?
Oh, he loves it. He loves it. Well, we're both into vintage because he's into vintage cars, and so it's the two go sort of side by side. I love that sort of. It's not that I wear strictly vintage, of course, but I love the feel of wearing clothes from a different era. An essence from a different time.
You really wouldn't struggle with Goodwood Festival of Speed. I mean,
I
should
the
think
revival.
absolutely. The revival.
Yes.
Sorry,
I've been there since the first one, I think.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, no, I love it.
Fabulous. I'd love to see some of those images. Right. Honestly, how many pairs of shoes do you own?
Goodness me. Well, do you know, I a lot. But
how many?
But a lot
Paula?
of them are from the past as well. So it's oh goodness, I mean, I'm not sure. It's probably not as many as you think. And a lot of them are over the years.
I'm not getting a clear answer here, am I?
Do you know, genuinely because I don't know.
That's really honest. Oh, okay, we're going to whiz on to some quick fire.
I have a lot of Wellington boots.
What's your favourite Wellington boot brand?
Probably Hunter, just because I've got more Hunters than anything else. But I recently discovered new to me, and it was Ilse Jacobsen. So I'm probably not saying that correctly, but Ilse Jacobsen, and they're lace-up boots in the front.
Sounds very Scandi.
And they're very Scandi, and they're fabulous, and they're so stylish to wear with dresses and things, but also they're very practical because they work. They're Wellington boots. So I'd say those ones.
Gorgeous. Right. Quick fire questions. High end or high street?
High end, I think, because of how it's made. And I know that, gosh, budget restraints and all that, but I think I've got jackets that were made very well that weren't cheap that I've had for decades. And I think that's the way forward, really. Keep it for decades.
Sustainability. Bling or bear?
Bear.
Minimalism or maximalism?
Oh, maximalism. I
Couture or charity shop?
A charity shop.
One off or bog off?
One off.
Crocs, cute or puke?
Oh, I'm sorry, but puke.
Sneakers or stilettos?
I would say stilettos, although my ankles would probably say otherwise.
Skinnies or boyfriends or wide legs in terms of jeans?
Probably wide legs, because then you could do that whole sort of 1930s sailor look.
I love it. You think in pictures. Bodycon or boho?
Oh, boho, definitely.
Sports luxe or rock chic?
Oh, I would say rock chic, I think. But my goodness, there's room for both of those, I'd say.
Glam or grunge?
Glam.
Definitely. Red carpet or relax?
Oh, red carpet, I think.
Party wear or PJs?
Oh, party wear.
Trend or style?
Style, definitely.
It's funny, I know the answers that you're going to give me. Experimental or uniform?
Oh, experimental.
Cashmere or cotton?
Cashmere, I think.
Shapewear or sexy lingerie?
Sexy lingerie.
Love it, girl. Tights or stockings?
Stockings to go with the sexy lingerie. My husband's going to laugh so much at this. He's going to say, okay, right now, what, from starting from now then?
Charity shop or resale?
Gosh, both of those are really good ways of getting things, though. So, charity shop, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go in the middle of that because I think
that's fine. You
resale is good too. I think that's important that people sort of resell their lovely items.
Vintage or rental?
Vintage for me.
Funny that. Recycled or upcycled?
Oh, both.
Love that. And finally, Paula, one very last question. At the end of the day, what do you or don't you wear in bed?
Oh, I wear sort of men's cotton pajamas, but with the short style.
Fabulous. Paula Sutton, it has been such a privilege and a pleasure to talk. I could have talked all afternoon. And next time we'll have lunch and we will chatter away.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me on.
Oh, what a pleasure.